So, Jim O'Keefe, welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here because we've had a good chat beforehand, I know, and there's lots to cover. I'm not sure if we get it all in one podcast, but anyway, how are you?
Great, yeah.
You are great, and you're looking great.
Thanks a million.
And
Delighted
you have
to be here.
repurposed yourself. I think we're not allowed to use the word retired anymore.
Okay.
So you've repurposed yourself after 35 years in AIB Bank in Ireland at the helm as Managing Director of Retail.
Yeah, so big changes.
Yes.
But I'm loving it. Yeah.
What are you doing with yourself?
So I took a kind of a break for a while, focused a bit on the health. I was always fit and worked out and did all those things. Did a good bit of hiking, a lot of endurance stuff. And
endurance stuff as in
long hikes,
Really?
Yeah, 6 days, things like that, just to try it out.
Yeah.
And then I started to the curiosity. I was always interested in AI. Way back from when I joined the bank, we were working. I was in technology. We were working on expert systems and things. So I had an interest in it. So I've done a bit of study on that, and then I wanted to do something with the NGO sector, because I felt that they would be left behind in the race for AI.
Right.
So I'm doing some mentoring with a few NGOs across the globe who are taking on AI as a project, and I'm loving it. I'm not helping them a lot on the AI front, helping them a little bit on the change.
Right. But I mean, how do you get matched up with these NGOs? I mean, is there some global network or something?
Yeah, there's a group out of Poland actually called Tech to the Rescue. So I was searching for something.
Right.
And this group landed. And they themselves are in a startup phase.
Yeah.
But I chatted to them and said that I didn't have any experience in NGOs and I didn't have any experience in AI, but I was willing to become a mentor.
Right.
So I said that I had managed to bluff my way through for 35 years in banking, so maybe I'd get away with it for another while. So it's great. Actually, it is. You talk about purpose.
Yeah.
It is fantastic. I'm working with an organisation out of Bali who are replanting trees or reforesting in Borneo, and the sense of purpose and they're genuine is tremendous.
And where does AI fit into what they're doing?
Yeah, it's all around. They're looking at the technology to be able to provide transparency to the donor that the sapling has actually gone into the ground. And that the sapling...
So the provenance is secured.
Exactly. Right. And regardless of what happens to the entity that is the NGO, you have that link. So for an organisation who wants to plant a tree every time they do a podcast or whatever, they have the assurance that they have that transparency. They're minting NFTs. Okay. And let's not get too deep into the technology now, Adam.
I know.
For that, so that can be provided. So it really, they're mixing that technology and that ability with and the users, the indigenous people are using the technology really well. Right.
So Jim, obviously now that you've stepped down, and recently stepped down from a big job and very, very, very heavy job, I would suspect, you get more time to think and to stand back and observe. What do you make of what's happening in Ireland at the moment, and particularly with the threat of 25% tariffs from the US?
Yeah, if you do a checkpoint on us at the moment, the economy is in great shape.
Sure.
So just if you took a photograph of it at the moment, when you look at growth out over the next couple of years, projections,
looking good.
3-4% over the next couple of years. The unemployment...
ahead of our European neighbours.
Absolutely. Yeah. On all fronts. 2.8 million people in employment. Record numbers, inflation coming down well below 2%. So the numbers are, as we look at it today, in great shape. And then the government, obviously there's a mix inside in it, but the fiscal side of it in great shape with a surplus of over 20 billion. So all in good shape. And I think even when we talk about headwinds, we do need to take that picture and say it's in good shape, because heading into any challenge or crisis, as I'd have a little bit of experience of, being in good shape going into it is important. So, and you do have, I think for them. Obviously, they're working very hard at the moment to build that relationship with the US and to talk about the employment that we have over that we employ over there. But there are challenges, there are challenges in relation to it. And you see what the pharma sector, etc. So it would be foolhardy for government and indeed for businesses not to be doing what if scenarios at the moment.
Yeah.
But and I think that's, because we could talk ourselves into a situation where there's a panic around it. Okay? But we've weathered Brexit, we've weathered COVID, etc.
Sure.
All of that done in a planful way where businesses themselves planned. A lot of them didn't have to execute the plans in terms of what was happening. But I think a lot. And now, whilst all that geopolitical piece is playing out, and I'm fascinated by it for all the wrong reasons, maybe in a lot of ways in terms of watching it. The other items that are out there are the climate issue hasn't abated. And I think that's one of the things, is that when something like this comes along, it distracts
from the main agenda.
And becomes the main agenda.
Right.
But we're still facing into a situation by 2030 that, we'll have tens of billions of fines if we don't hit the big targets. Exactly.
And we're not likely to hit those targets.
Like they're hugely challenging.
Yeah.
So like that piece. So what you don't want is something as important as that to become hugely urgent.
Right.
You want it to become urgent now.
So you can pace yourself out.
You can pace yourself out, exactly. And I mean, the other challenge for us is that execution-wise, so we would appear to have plenty of money around in terms of at a system level. But the housing crisis is just unimaginable. That even I came over a kind of a circuitous route this morning because there was problems on the M50 as we were chatting. And I mean, it's hard to believe that we don't have the output when you see the amount of houses being built as you come along.
Really?
But at the same time, we don't. We're falling well short. And that execution piece on items is a challenge, because that's feeding into people talent not hanging around, companies questioning, their presence here in terms of housing availability and the challenges that come with that. So I do think that whilst there's a real need for businesses to be making sure that they're looking at what is the downside of
the risks and so on.
The risks.
And sometimes I wonder, is there enough consideration given to risk analysis and risk mitigation and so on? You're just not sure. But Jim, when you say, and I agree with you, that the numbers are looking good, I mean, employment is effectively zero here in Ireland, and the GDP rather than GNP, all great. And, having the surplus is all wonderful. But I wonder, is that always travelling through to the front line in terms of like small businesses? You hear retail is flat. There's not much growth in retail. Hospitality, on the tourism and domestic, they're not doing too badly, but they're all complaining about costs and the impact of increased cost, minimum wage and energy and so on. So is there a match between what's actually the big numbers and what people on the ground are feeling?
I think there is definitely a mismatch.
Right.
There's no doubt. And whether that's businesses, small businesses, or whether it's individuals, you just have to listen to what people are saying out there. There's a whole raft of people who feel they're struggling.
Sure.
And that is probably one of the challenges that globally we're facing. And indeed, the introduction or the revolution that has landed already with AI and will land with AI is part of this, is that the distribution of wealth continues to tighten at the top end.
Indeed, yeah.
And I think, and that has happened, like we might say in Ireland that it's not happening at the pace, the statistics used to be that, there's 15 people have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of people in the world, okay? Which is
changing.
Yeah, which is a shocking statistic. But when you look at it for ourselves, that top 10%, the wealth built up in that top 10% in the last 10, 15 years has been extraordinary.
Seems to crash effectively, isn't it?
Exactly. And so there's, and in that bottom grouping, you can certainly see that there's a weakening in terms of people are challenged through it. So I think that the big numbers, the challenge over the next while is to get that money to flow into the hands of the wider grouping. And that comes back to that whole housing challenge as well.
Yeah, as an example.
As people who've and like even in the middle ground, if you look at the numbers, you'd say that the middle 40% have improved wealth significantly over the past while. But when you look deeply into it, it's actually property related.
Right.
So what has happened is that so when you look at the layers,
there's always a risk of another bubble, though, isn't there? And
well, I think there's less risk of another bubble because, in fairness, the bubble that was fueled the last time was predominantly credit. That's not in place at the moment. The challenge is that wealth distribution looks like it's been distributed into that 40%, but that's just in a lot of cases due to the value of their home. Right. So it's not wider wealth. It's not wealth that they can liquidate or use in relation to it. So I think coming back to your point is that ability to cascade that wealth and that money out into the hands of individuals is going to be critical over the next period of time.
How can that happen? I mean, who does what? It's government, I assume you're talking about here, having to make some changes?
The government to some extent, and then obviously also, through the financial system. That's, the old raison d'etre was banks collected deposits and they lent out into the various sectors. I think that role with small businesses is powerful. SMEs account for something like 70% of people employed in Ireland.
Sure.
So there is an element there, is that, and between maybe the partnership with government, whether it is the SBCI, etc., looking at, are there schemes there to support businesses that want to invest in it? And it's a partnership between the likes of the strategic banking entity and the banks to see, is there a way that capital can flow into the hands of those small businesses to help them with the investment and what they need to undertake.
So obviously, as a career banker, you are a complete advocate of the banking system and the need for banking. So what is the main role here, Jim?
Like it divides probably into a couple of headings. One is it's a massive payment utility.
Yes, of course.
So today,
the transactions.
It's the lifeblood of I was saying there was some problems on the M50 today. If there was problems on the payment system for a half an hour,
as there have been for some banks, indeed.
It is headline news within minutes because of the volume. So there's a huge payments utility, which also is a huge identity piece. Right. Today, if your identity is hooked to your account when you're applying for anything. So there's a huge role there in terms of just that reliability, that trust and payments piece, which is massive and really important to the organisations. And then obviously, as we said, it's a deposit taker, and that trust piece. Whilst we talk a lot about new players, etc., still people trust an awful lot in the bank. So. And you can see that there's a growing arms in relation to wealth management and supporting customers in managing their wealth and managing it, which is a big piece. But then outside of the payments piece, in the community, that raison d'etre around funding and supporting SMEs and lending. Right across. And as those SMEs and businesses make the changes they need to make to migrate towards, a climate-friendly entities. Yeah. And then obviously the whole housing piece and funding the housing market as well is a big piece for them.
And Jim, there's a huge growth, and it's a government agenda. We already touched on it, the sustainability and the green. So that cascades to banks, I should say, around green loans and the importance of green loans and even getting favourable rates. To what extent is that working as an initiative?
Yeah, well, look, if you look at the stats across the banking industry, very strong growth right across, and all the banks have invested in it. Simple piece to this is that, first of all, it was completely driven by consumer behaviour. consumers were looking for it.
Yeah.
So they wanted sustainable options. They wanted to be rewarded for investing in their home. And it makes financial sense then as well. A lot of the products initially and even still are fixed rate mortgages, if you take the mortgage side of it for a second.
Yeah.
And typically fixed rate mortgages perform better in terms of arrears and stress, etc.
Oh, really?
It's just by its very nature, people who are taking out fixed mortgages, they're probably a little bit more prudent. They're probably looking at the risks, etc. So all makes good sense in terms of it, and that has worked well. And it also makes sense because the homeowner is investing in a very sustainable property. Their ongoing bills will probably be somewhat reduced in relation to it. So it all feeds through.
And what about businesses, though, getting green loans? I mean, the green loans are not just for individuals, domestic individuals.
No, and that side of it is very strong as well. And I think because there would have been a lot of talk around, well, you shouldn't be lending into X sector or Y sector because they're not sustainable. The banks took a very pragmatic and strategic approach to that, which was we need to support businesses migrating. So there's a lot of loans out there, a lot of options out there for businesses that are saying, from farming or agri-processors, etc. You pick from transport, etc., whereby the banks are lending to the businesses to support them in that migration piece.
Right.
And this makes sense because ultimately here, that's being built into regulation. You see it. Businesses see it in their own regulations in terms of what they have to return. And then it's being built into capital adequacy tests for the banks, etc. So the central banks are also pushing the banks towards that green lending agenda.
And you also see some of the big PE houses that they will only invest in companies now that have some sort of a green agenda.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And because ultimately here, when you look at it, there's investors out there, individuals investors, whether that's, pension funds, whatever it is, who have a personal purpose around investing in climate friendly organisations and organisations that are doing something to change that dial.
So Jim, interestingly, we have a new product called, it's an organisation health assessment. We call it the CARA 7 Index. And within that, they were able to measure ESG. So, because we know how important that is. But I mean, I ask you this with my tongue in cheek. Is ESG just over the top now? I mean, is it gone too far? Is it putting just another metric that people need to consider? Or what are your thoughts?
No, I don't believe so. I think
ESG, by the way, I should say, is environmental, social, and governance. So it's a huge pressure on organisations now to start being more considerate and respectful of these three key areas. Diversity and inclusion would be also part of that S part, the social bit. And let's not talk about what's happening in the US with the D&I agenda being kicked out. But back to the point. What are your thoughts on ESG? Is it gone too far?
No, I think we need to be careful that things don't become a tick box exercise.
Right.
Okay, but if you break it down, if you look at the environmental, the social, and the governance piece, okay, three massive aspects for any organisation.
Yeah.
So even if you just take the G piece in terms of the governance, that's not a nice to have.
No.
Look at the amount of organisations, both and I was talking about NGOs a while ago, etc. Everything from large corporates to the charity sector that have suffered as a result of poor governance and poor metrics and minding of that. So that's not a fad.
Yeah, that's the right thing to do.
That's the right thing to do. I always had the old saying when I was inside: "Let governance be your friend."
Right. Rather than pain in the ass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Leverage it. It's there to be used so that decisions are made in an orderly fashion, etc. And then if you look at the social side of it, okay, there's certain, it's like any period of time, there's a lot of bumps in the road at the moment on the social agenda. But if you look at it from our perspective in terms of where Ireland is at, social housing, the challenges we have around homeless, etc. Whatever aspect you want to look at, they're important agendas.
Sure.
The D&I agenda, and in fairness, we were chatting about elements before we came on. like that has not gone away as the right thing to do in terms of where we want to move. I think all, by the very nature of some of the voices that are out there, they're going to throw things way down the road, throw bones way down the road just to see what happens and to see. But I think those people that weren't just doing a tick box exercise on it will sustain in relation to it.
Yeah.
And then on the environmental side, I mean, the problem just grinds away every day. So it's not distracted by the voices or by what's happening on Capitol Hill today. Mm-hmm. The atmosphere is still heating away as we go. So they're not. I think what may have happened is that maybe people who were treating them as tick box exercises saw this as an opportunity to say, that's a load of cobblers. I'm moving off.
Right.
But I wouldn't.
For the serious players, they're not going to do that.
I think some afternoon somebody's going to come back from lunch and say, just before I went out this morning, it was all talk about, whatever geopolitical was on. And this afternoon, we're back on ESG seriously. Sure. And I think people would get distracted from it at their peril in relation to it.
And Jim, you mentioned the word trust. And I think the word trust, and for some people, wouldn't associate that with banking because of what happened. And we're talking here now about 2008, Jim. That's 17 years ago. When I thought about this, I couldn't believe myself even hearing the words. It's 17 years since the crash. But you guys in banking had a very tough time after that. And from a culture perspective, I mean, trust is really founded in culture in the first place, in an organization culture. And my take on that is around having values, because values prompt certain behavior. How did you manage that whole transition? Because you got to a good place, but it must have been difficult, Jim, at the time after the crash, for people in the front line, taking all the negativity from customers. How did you cope?
Yeah, it was. I think first of all we have to remember that it was a really difficult place for everybody.
Absolutely.
For customers, it was disastrous for a lot of people, and then for the public at large, it was really tough. And I don't think I could ever talk about that period without acknowledging that
the hurt and all that.
The hurt, and also the fact that the organisation I worked for at that point received over 20 billion to sustain it. So there's a great depth of gratitude in that. But then when I look inside into the organisation, and what was happening at the time was that people were, people wouldn't say they worked in the bank. They'd have said they were, if a taxi was
they're embarrassed to say it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know it firsthand. I got a few of those rattles in the back of a taxi as you'd be driving along and you'd be telling them what you were doing or where you were heading. But for me at the time, visibility was critical. Just being out there listening. I always remember being down in Cork, obviously, one of the locations we toured. Well, there was a couple of us went out, doing road shows, and a few people joined us from outside the bank at the time. But I was down in Cork, and we were being leathered from the floor, and next thing, one guy stood up, and I was answering questions.
Yeah.
And then one guy stood up and he said, guys, we haven't seen anybody from the banks. This is the first group we've seen out.
Really? Right.
So, and he said, whatever we do, let's acknowledge that they're there and they're visible. And actually, that was it. You had to take the heat because wrong had happened and people were hurting.
Yes.
But I think that visibility for staff, if you can imagine the staff in the locality, and we did it across the country, they felt buoyed up by the fact that at least their senior people were coming out and taking the heat, and acknowledging that it wasn't the people on the ground. But
I remember, Jim. You and I know each other a long time, and many, many years ago, I was a non-exec director with a particular company, no names attached. You know who I'm talking about, and we were going through renegotiation and all of that, and you were the head of the financial restructuring group in AIB at the time.
That's right. Financial Solutions Group.
Financial FSG, that's correct. And I remember we were having some frustrations, and I remember calling you and I said, look, would you meet this fella, the owner of the business? And you did. And I think that was even transformational somewhat for you, Jim. Do you remember what I'm talking about here?
I do, yeah.
Tell us a bit, without names, of course, but talk about that.
Yeah, I think when I met the person involved, who was MD of a very sizable entity, was broadly through the process at that stage, was working through it, was working through it. But
near the end.
I'll never forget what really struck home was, in our mind's eye, when we think about a business or an entity or a corporate or something like that, we think we can visualize a kind of a building or an entity.
Yes.
Okay. We don't visualize people in your mind's eye, and I know the same problem exists when people visualize banking and head offices and things like that.
Less human, yeah.
But I sat down with the person involved for a coffee or a bit of breakfast, whatever, and he described for me the journey from once the business had fallen apart
during the crash.
The crash, and it was the story of just consumer demand, etc., all coming through, and it was, as MD of the organization, he relived that as he was telling me the story.
You could see the emotions in his face.
And I could see, I call it the guilt that he carried for that, right?
Right.
And even in my conversation with him, it was almost to say, you weren't alone in that.
Yeah.
It's in terms of it, and for me, the only contribution I could make when he was talking through that piece was almost to say, look, you weren't alone. You shouldn't carry this degree of guilt around it. But and then we discussed, how he felt the bank had worked with him and how tough that was, okay? And the part of that we got wrong, and part of that would just be tough in terms of how we had to get people to a solution, etc. But I'll never forget when he talked about the solution, he physically moved in the chair and sat up and smiled and started to talk about the restructure that had happened and how he was set forward.
Right.
And since then, the one item is, since then when we talk about, businesses and SMEs accounting for 70% of employment, things like that, I now visualize when somebody talks about a business, a person or people.
Very good.
And he really brought that home, because it just showed that SME, that business owner, they own it with their heart and soul, and they carry it on their shoulders. If it's going wrong, they feel the blame for it, etc. So it was fascinating, and a business that has thrived
ever since. Indeed, yeah, they're rocking and rolling for sure.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time, to me, because you and I knew each other, we were chatting from time to time, and I felt this is a really important thing to do. And I don't just mean for the person concerned, but just for me, joining the dots with two people on opposite sides, you could argue, and it was opposite sides because there was some tension. But to see you responding to that, I must say, I took that really to heart, that it was very good of you to do that. And it leads me on to another thing, Jim, which is this notion of being customer-centric. And, when you think about banking, at the end of the day, with the greatest respect to all the different brands in Ireland or any other country that might be listening, a mortgage is a mortgage is a mortgage. At the end of the day, in a 30, 25-year mortgage, it all adds up to pretty much the same thing in terms of cost at the end of the day. So to differentiate yourself on cost, or being the lowest mortgage or the best value, it's really hard. So finding other ways to differentiate for any business beyond just product or beyond price has got to be an opportunity, or indeed a challenge. And I know you were really hot on the whole customer focus, because you remember only a short time before you stepped down, you engaged with me and we went on the Wild Atlantic Way tour. Do you remember that?
I do.
And we toured the west coast of Ireland, and I was really struck by the fact that what you want to do was hear from customers. So we ran a series of events where I would run a workshop with a group of customers for different products, listening to them, getting them to open up and talk about how they felt. But then you and the relevant head of that department, be it mortgages or SME or whatever, came in and listened. I mean, where did this thought come from, Jim, around that notion of listening, actively listening to customers and not just sitting in the ivory tower of Molesworth Street, so far removed that leave it to the branches?
Yeah, in actual fact, it is that piece around just being visible and engaging. And, it's the human piece.
Right.
And people immediately appreciate it. They just want to be listened to. And now they do want you to take action as well.
Sure.
But it's a powerful item when you're discussing later on in meetings or when you're trying to explain the importance of something, to be able to say, I was sitting in Galway last week.
There's great credibility with that, isn't there?
And, and a customer took out a 40-page document that they had to fill out or something like that. There's great power in that. And I think it also connects you to it. So you've an empathy that you're bringing into that meeting as well.
Yeah, because you have data coming out your ears, Jim, don't you?
Completely.
In terms of customer feedback data, but that's all just a set of numbers. But to have the qualitative element where you had stories to put flesh on the bones, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And it just brings it to life. And actually, it brings it to life for the people that you're working with as well. And also that piece of engagement. Because, customers who have had issues where we've got it wrong, it can be terrifying for people to engage.
Yeah.
Because if you know you've got it wrong, well, where does this conversation go? But the power of it and just and at senior level especially, that opportunity to engage and deal with issues and understand where people are coming from and realize that people do not expect you to get it 100% perfect, but that you respond for it. And it's motivating.
But actually, on that point, Jim, I think you're right. They don't expect you to be perfect, because what I found when you weren't in the room, and you're not hearing this for the first time, but when I was in the room on my own with your customers, listening to them, they had a good old bark at you as an entity, as a bank. But they got it off their chest, Jim. And then when, you remember the format, you would come back in then a couple of hours later and I would repeat on their behalf. But they were so calmed at that stage because they had got things off their chest. They'd been listened to. And I think there's a real lesson for any business in that particular exercise, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that engagement piece is gold dust.
Yeah.
Because you can't, and
not to be afraid.
Not to be afraid. And even the preparation. Even the preparation that you have to do to engage and to understand things and to chat to the people locally to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
The whole process is so beneficial. Because I'm not going to wander into those meetings without getting a sense, is there an issue locally?
Yeah.
What has been so you're learning so much as you go through it. And years later, customers will come up to me and say that they remember being engaged with. I had a fantastic thing at a particular ball recently where a customer came up and said, I think it was 12 years previously I'd engaged with them on something and I was sure it wasn't going to be a good outcome.
Right.
But it's just fantastic, because people remember how you helped. And when you talk about differentiating, and if I was still in AIB, so this is what I would have said, which is that the others do find it difficult to differentiate. The
others. Nice one.
It's like as people in Cork sometimes say, there's two types of people from Cork and people who wish they were from Cork.
Now,
so there's an AIB mortgage.
You're sitting here in Dublin now, Jeff, be careful.
So there's an AIB mortgage and then there's others. But one of the items is people do realise that it's a big investment.
Right.
And that the differentiator, that empathy and that trust when somebody sits down with you and explains it and takes you through it, isn't something like that the customer throws it away as a sales pitch.
Yeah.
They see it. There's a lot of wider stuff where somebody says, have you thought about the following items?
Right.
You know yourself when people are going through the mortgage process.
Yes.
There's so much other stuff going on that they need support.
Well, Jim, I remember an incident many, many years ago, and it's the opposite to your story. It's the negative focus on it. I was working with a motor company, and we had a group of motor dealers in the room talking about customer service and so on. And think about a motor dealer. They repair cars. And back in those days, cars were not as good quality as they are today. But they repair cars. And then as part of the whole message around customer centricity and customer experience, I was challenging them to say, well, so, okay, somebody collects their car after leaving with you for service for a few days. And then they drive away. So what happens then? Well, nothing happens then. I said, but would you not ring them and just see if a couple of days later and say, is everything okay with your car? And they said, you must be joking. Why would we want to do that? Sure, there might be something wrong with it. I mean, that was their absolute thinking, that they'd rather not know. But if they just stand back and think about that as a concept, the customer, if they do have something wrong with the car, what are they thinking about the service that they just had? So they're going off telling their friends and colleagues that they had a terrible experience, the car is still not, and the motor dealer doesn't even know what's happening. So it's just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that concept of buyer remorse.
Yes.
And it used to be talked about kind of positively on the basis that buyer remorse meant that the person wouldn't really admit to it to anybody else because they'd feel they'd just bought this thing, whatever it was.
Feel guilty maybe, yeah.
So the power of the provider contacting them would be huge because they're probably the one person they would say to, actually, you know something, I'm not happy with what I got because of the following reasons. And solve it. So I think you'd be playing into you'd be pushing an open door as you contact it.
And in fairness now, all the motor dealers now do have that kind of service where they do contact every seller, every customer that has bought a car. But I'm not sure if it happens with servicing, but that's another story. Jim, the culture change, you were involved in the culture change, and I know you had a culture refresh during COVID. What was the whole thinking behind that?
Well, look, I think apart from one item consistently is that, as you said, you know, banks wouldn't be associated with trust, or that would.
Well, back then they were.
So we've been on a journey, and that journey has I suppose met a lot of bumps along the way with various issues that the banks have faced around charging and mortgages, etc. Mm-hmm. So there has always been a focus on developing that trust with customers and developing that culture. So we went through, you know, looking at our values in terms of it, and it still came down to that customer first piece. You know, ultimately here in terms of whether you want transparency, whether you want accountability or integrity or ethical behavior, when you boil it all down, if you're putting the customer first and you're making your decisions in a customer-centric way, well, then you're bringing the right. You can't lose, exactly. Yeah. And that, you know, that's hard because sometimes you have processes and systems and products that are built in particular ways, and you're trying to amend and change. But I think as the organisation moved forward, and the banking sector in general, I sat on the Irish Banking and Culture Board, which was set up for the very purpose of trying to lead the way in relation to the culture of the banks in Ireland. And you know, I could see across the organisations the work that was going on to bring that into play. And there has been huge improvement, but it still remains. Now, there's an interesting piece here. I talked at the beginning, or at one point you asked me about the role of banks. When you look at it today, the banks process, trillions of money for people. It's still the mainstay for deposit holders in terms of where they put their money. So in the transactions that customers undertake with banks, there's a lot of trust. But it's kind of almost an invisible trust whereby it's I can trust them to do this. Exactly. And then there's that piece above the line. Now But
how much of it is media, I wonder, Jim? I wonder, does the average Joe on the ground really feel the way sometimes the negative connotations that's portrayed in the media? And this, I just wonder.
Yeah, sorry, when you look at customer surveys, and in fairness to the Irish Banking Culture Board, they did the 8 surveys, I think was, if I have the right recall on it, you could see the improvements coming through and the discussions. But I think the hangover of the crisis was there. And also,
Is that a generational shift then, Jim?
I think a lot of progress has been made on it, but you must also remember at one level, a bank says no.
Of course, and it has to say no for good reason.
A bank says no, and it also follows up, and it can have difficult conversations. And I think depending on that, many years ago there was a partnership set up with a leading retailer or grocery retailer at the time in relation to banking. Okay, and it was set up, and the entity was put into place, and the man leading out, I won't be misquoting. I won't refer to him in case I'm misquoting. He said it was alarming for him because it was the first time he was associated with something that had to say no. So I just think there's an actual piece that a bank has to play as they come through. Now, at a leadership level, a huge amount of this was also if you want your team to lead out with customers in an authentic, fair way and to put the customer first, that has to be happening at leadership level. So the leaders have to be authentic. You cannot be behaving in a way in the organization that is very different to what you see outside. So, and sometimes I think organizations miss that. They miss that ability to say how we work with our staff and with our colleagues is how they will face out to meet customers ultimately.
Yeah, but I've seen that, Jim. I've seen organizations where I've worked with them on a culture refresh, and the culture refresh is all about driving new behaviors and new ways of working through values as the prompt to do that. And then the expectation is that everybody will just go along with this. I mean, even when you put programs in place like leadership programs and communications programs, steering groups, et cetera, to drive this new culture, it takes years to embed. But there can be people at leadership level that just don't get on the bus. And I've been in situations where senior leaders were actually encouraged to go and get their magic elsewhere, Jim. Even though they might have been rock star performers in terms of be it numbers or the particular job that they were doing, but they weren't a fit anymore with the culture. So they were encouraged to move on. I mean, it sounds to me like you would agree with that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, leadership is complicated and it's vast and all those things. And then, or else it's just fairly simple stuff. Indeed, which is that you pick a team.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to back that team.
Yeah.
So there are going to be moments you're going to have to back that team because you won't be in the room when they make decisions.
Right.
So when you pick the team, you have to make sure they're the ones that you'll back.
Yeah, yeah.
And to that point, if you have somebody, the old analogy was the goal scorer and you put them on the bench.
Yeah.
I've had over the years many times where I had to make the hard call. Because it's not just, remember what's happening is, and it goes back even in the GA clubs, whether you were playing or you had kids or whatever, there'd be somebody who was really good, who might only turn up some of the time to training or whatever. It begins to eat into the rest of the team.
Yeah.
Who begin to think, so it's okay not to turn up.
Right.
It's okay not to use those behaviors. So I think what you're aiming for is that the collective move together. But I think if leaders keep it in the back of their mind that they have to back their people, and when you're choosing your team, you're choosing it on the basis that you're going to have to step up to the plate and back them someday. You'll make wise decisions as to who you're putting out front.
Right. Jim, this is a really interesting one, and I'm going to take a break there because I want to go back to that point. But let's just take a quick break just for a few minutes. Today's episode is in partnership with Big Red Cloud, a leader in accounting software. So it's time to get rid of the Excel spreadsheets and switch over to smart accounting. So welcome back. So Jim, just before the break, we were touching on leadership. And I'd love to get some more thoughts from you on leadership, because when I think about leadership and how, and I say it has changed, but actually maybe it hasn't changed, but let me explain. I feel that since COVID, that there has been such a swing in the world around people being taking care of each other, which is what happened during COVID, much more sense of awareness of people, humanity, and looking out for one another, I guess. And I think leaders now need to have a much better balance of grit and grace. And what I mean by that is that in the older days, Jim, when you talk about leadership, it was often defined by competencies, hard competencies like strategic thinking, decision making, results focused. Do you remember all that kind? And they haven't gone away. But the notion of being more focused on people, which should have always been there, but now I think it has really escalated. And I like to think now that the whole focus on people needs to be right out front. And I talk about humility as a key competency and empathy as a key competency now, which links into your whole point. Tell us a bit more about what it was like leading. You were a bank of 10,000 people, and of that 10,000, I think you were responsible for 5,000. That's a big business, Jim, which has expectations in the market for not only providing a service, but also delivering numbers. So at the end of the day, you were a business. But talk to me about that style of leadership that you believe was appropriate for that size of a company.
Yeah, I agree in terms of the need for that shift to people and to understanding it. And for me, that, when I say it was easy, it was where my focus would have been.
Your natural default.
My natural default, where I like to operate. But the competency piece and the credibility piece is a basic. So you can't fill it with bluff. So because people want to know that you have the competency and you have the credibility. Yeah. We talked earlier about that ability to go out and have a conversation in public, that ability to deal with issues head on, and to be able to answer questions on your feet,
know your stuff,
coming at you.
Yeah.
Now, as you say, that was kind of 80% of the story previously, but it's still a basic that has to be there. Then the piece on that is that humility and that authenticity is critical for people. And it is funny, just on the break there, we were talking about it, even when you're doing calls with staff, or when people don't mind if you mess up, or if you don't know the answer to a question.
Sure.
Or you have an issue. It is being able to say that. And I think, that comes with engaging. It doesn't come with rehearsing in a room on your own. Mm-hmm. It comes with engaging and making mistakes and being able to step back and say, look, I made a mistake there. I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
That was wrong. And listening to people then as well.
But Jim, I mean, I appreciate that's your style, but I mean, for many people, that the EQ element of leadership to me is critical. And EQ, behind that, you've got self-awareness and then self-regulation. That ability to be able to recognize the good and the bad in yourself, but then to be able to regulate yourself accordingly, knowing the impact you have on other people. But very often ego gets in the way, or even power, the position that somebody holds. You must have seen examples of that, no names, of course, but you must have seen examples where leaders didn't quite perform so well. They didn't have that EQ.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think with you talked about performing and getting ready for it. Like, for leaders, there's a physical piece, there's a mental piece in terms of their preparation.
Right.
You can't be tired. You can't be unable to concentrate when you're doing these items. And some of that erratic behavior doesn't come from maybe a problem with their core values. Sometimes it comes from the fact that people are tired, or they're not ready for it, or they're not able to listen, etc. And their skills, that whole piece, that rounded piece around the physical, is something that, as senior leaders, and you see it across the industry, where people are spending more time making sure that they're physically fit to be able to deal with the strains that are coming at them. Critical. And then the next piece is around being able to operate. And one of I had many squiggly tests and things done over the years, to tell me what sort of a genius or lunatic I was.
Yeah.
But one of the items I remember, one group talking to us about breathing and about how to breathe correctly when you were listening to somebody. so that you were able to take it in.
Right.
So there are skills that, because we talk about EQ and we think you're born with it and you either have it or you haven't got it. Now, there are some individuals, to be fair, who are either born with it, at maybe
but it can be learned
at the extreme, exactly. But there are certainly techniques that bring it through. And then, at their leadership level.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see that there's somebody who's struggling with this, then the piece is, well, you have to work with them to help them understand the steps. So there's a huge coaching role as a leader as well to explain it, because we talked earlier about getting people to go out and meet customers or chat about items. That piece often, I was in a situation whereby you were helping somebody to understand that, even at a senior level, as to how they might go about that and how they might feel somewhat protected when they were out, rather than that they felt that they were going to be taken out of the news.
I think also, Jim, it can be also a measure of the strength and how embedded the culture is. Because, for example, let's just take an example. If the culture in the organization is quite well embedded around respect for other people, as an example, and that's being called out, look, we expect everybody to respect others in the way they speak to them, the way they direct them, or whatever. But when a culture is not strong in an organization, what tends to take over is individual leaders' own styles, based on their own, how they grew up through their CV. So if they learned bad behavior elsewhere, and they believe that's the way to make it in this world of leadership, and they emulate or copy that, unless the culture is strong, unless the culture dominates and calls out that. I mean, you must have seen that too, Jim, that as you travel through that culture change in AIB, that must be an attempt also to try and get some sort of a commonality about how people treat each other.
No, I absolutely. And I mean, they were hard conversations.
Yeah.
I was chatting with somebody recently and saying that one of the challenges for senior leaders, a lot of senior leaders are not comfortable with one-to-one conflict and dealing with issues head on. And that can breed a kind of a culture as well, whereby it's dealt with in open forum rather than dealt with privately. And
that's when it gets awkward and blunt, isn't it? It's a blunt instrument.
It is. Whereas I would have seen over the years, there were situations where I just did not like the way I was treated or responded to or whatever. And as long as the issue at hand could be dealt with, and I could hold or park the culture piece until afterwards, I would always go to address that afterwards.
Would you?
I would deal with it afterwards.
Right.
And just,
close the circle on that.
Yeah. I remember one lovely example, nameless, of course. One lovely example was somebody came to me and said that they were apologizing for how they had come at the particular issue, which was because most people know what's right and what's wrong.
Sure.
But they'll get away with what's wrong if they can. And they obviously knew from my facial expression, which can give away a lot of times. And they just said to me, and it won't happen again. And I just said to them as they were leaving, I said, just to confirm, you are absolutely sure it won't happen again.
Did you really?
Very good. There is that piece, I think, Alan, is that if you want the senior leaders need to embrace the culture.
Very good.
Then they need to call it out to one another as they go along and go through it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the people looking at them, the people looking at them don't see them as authentic.
Yeah, but it reminds me of a great friend since passed, a parish priest actually, a guy called Eugene Kennedy, and he had this expression which is wonderful. He said, these kind of behaviours are caught, not taught. So what I mean is that if people see leaders behaving in a way that's appropriate, then they'll say they'll role model effectively. They'll follow that. But if they see leaders that are inappropriate in the way they do things, they will observe that and learn from it. Learn, unfortunately, the wrong stuff, just like children do with parents. So I'm really pleased to hear he's focusing on that senior leadership piece. But Jim, I want to move on to another topic, which is competition in Ireland in banking. Now, I say this tongue-in-cheek, but you guys got away with a lot. Only 3 brands in the marketplace: AIB, Bank of Ireland, and PTSB. Am I right, Jim?
Yeah, so I think, and I sat and was president of the Banking and Payments Federation for a period of time. So I was there through that transition with Ulster and with KBC exiting the market, and
getting all their customers
and facilitating their customers into the wonderful new locations.
Yes,
I think at a universal banking level, you're right. There's 3 universal banks.
I mean, I know there's the Avant Money and others as well who are coming hard and strong.
But so when you look at it as a universal, in other words, players who provide a broad range of universal banking products. You have 3 main ones in Ireland today. And also banks that take and transact and support customers in a cash environment as well in the community. You have those with a physical presence in those locations. But you take any of the lines of business. So you take personal loans. 50% of the personal loans in the Irish market is done by who? Credit unions.
No way. Really?
So I might be wrong on the 50%, but it could be 49 or whatever. We'll use circa. But so in that particular line, you have a significant other player who isn't the banks. If you take current accounts, on Post now do current accounts. You have Revolut who are in the market doing payments and transactions. So on each line, you talked about Avant in relation to mortgages.
Yeah.
You have many players now in the mortgage space.
Sure.
And I don't know, maybe 35% of it, 40% of it is done through brokers. So when you take each of the banking lines, when you look at wealth management, you have Goodbody and Davy and Brewin Dolphin and many others who are in. So you take each one. I would say that if you were, so you started on the basis that there was 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say you're closer to 40.
Would you really?
When you look at car finance, we talked about car finance a while ago.
Yeah.
Again, massive numbers of other players, right from the brands themselves that provide it into the market. So as you take each one.
Right. So no room for complacency then, Jim.
In actual fact, if you think about it, if you were one of the entities and you are providing a universal solution to customers, and customers want that in ways, obviously.
Yeah.
The other players are coming at you in each niche line. So it's actually quite a difficult competitive world in that way.
Right.
But that's not to say that that there wouldn't be perceived some complacency. But I think underneath it, each of the business owners who would own each of those lines would feel that there's quite a competitive market.
I'm sure, and within their vertical.
Within their vertical, exactly.
So, Jim, you mentioned Revolut, and technology. The role of technology going forward. I mean, it must have been a real wake up, was it, when Revolut hit the scene? Whether they are making money or not, that's another conversation. But they really have penetrated the market significantly, haven't they?
Yeah, but absolutely, and it's with these type of things. I think the phrase I used to use was that to try and to sustain some sort of calm when people might be inclined to lose the run of themselves. Was I'm not worried, I'm concerned. Right?
Yeah.
So, but if you think about it, think about the number of payments you make today.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the number of times you'll tap your card today, or you'll. Or my watch. Money that will go out of your account. The pie has expanded exponentially in terms of the volume of payments that are going out.
So percentage is the important measure rather than the volume, is it?
Exactly. So you take Revolut as it was now. In fairness, I watched them at a distance and watched the sector at somewhat of a distance now. Customers were using them. A lot of customers were using them to move some money over and then use it as a wallet. From there, but they were still maintaining their core or their salary mandated into the
mainstream bank.
The mainstream banks. In terms of the wake up call, some interesting technology came out, which is going to happen when a niche player comes in at you. As I said earlier, when one of the niche players comes at you with that type of proposition, Now, in fairness, Ireland would have been reasonably well served with the technology that the banks had brought forward, and we were blessed that we had very good visionaries on the technology front over the years who had brought it forward. But and now, you know, with the evolution of data and AI, etc., and the use of that, obviously the likes of Revolut have a lot of data that's available to them to use. But I think when you even look at KBC and Ulster Bank as they exited the market, the whole focus for their customers was that they wanted a banking player where they could house their account, whilst yet continuing to use the likes of Revolut as well. So they're not an either or any longer.
Right.
You know,
right.
we don't even talk about PayPal and others. Okay.
True.
When you
true.
ask, they're all huge entities in terms of transactions, in terms of but the pie has increased significantly.
Right. So Jim, rounding back to what we were touching on in the beginning, which is how you're spending your time now, and with NGOs and AI, I mean, where do you see the future of banking? And then we'll talk about back to your NGOs again in a moment. But where do you see the future of banking?
Like, it's digital dominance, okay, and the capability of AI in this space is massive. You know, obviously today I would expect that where you're seeing it is in, you know, fraud prevention, etc. But as it moves across, its ability, customers still want personalized features and products and services. So it has a huge ability to personalize the propositions, etc. Right. So massive. And banking, interestingly, has always used models and decision trees and you know, for lending, etc. Sure. So it wasn't the same pace as AI. I'm not for a second saying that. Yeah. But that whole piece around using data, warehousing data, doing propensity modeling, etc., was all there. The firepower now to use it
has escalated.
Has escalated, and to use it in a positive way. Because, you know, I would, as we discussed earlier, that trust and that ethical piece is well embedded. So that ability to use it in that way. And I think that is still a journey for banking is that trust piece but as they innovate and take that on board. And then obviously the whole sustainability agenda that we talked about earlier is massive, you know, in terms of where banks take it. And they have a massive role in terms of the distribution of capital as we go forward.
So Jim, if you were to wave a magic wand and look back at your 35 years in the bank, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Wow, there's a question. There's a question.
We started out as a teacher, by the way, Jim. You told me earlier. I mean, I'm shocked to hear that one.
Yeah,
I don't know why I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I started out as a teacher and joined the bank for a couple of months.
There you go.
So turned a few bob over the summer. That's not what I said at the interview. But anyway, there was, maybe I should have been better at planning. One of the you know, just from as I sit now with the ability to be curious, to be just infinitely curious, which is where I've forced myself to be. Okay, rather than ploughing certain fairly traditional paths that I could have.
That others before you have perhaps.
Exactly. I'm not criticising what different stages, different views. That piece around giving yourself space to be curious. It's you know, I'd always be interested, even when ChatGPT came out, I'd be messing around with it, writing poems for things. Yeah. But that ability, and maybe in the cut and thrust of work, we get so busy that we are not able. We just physically don't have the time or the headspace to lift up to be curious, and it's at the expense of both ourselves in terms of our own well-being, because that curiosity is motivational. But also, I think it's at the expense of the business. Yeah. That you so the more time you can take to be curious. I used to joke with the team and say, you know what I mean? If you feel like you're just bordering on being lazy and thinking about stuff, you're probably getting there, right? Now, I had to be careful on that one, obviously. But I think that's and that's a reflection I'd probably have now after a year or whatever of having that time. Is that it's extraordinary to have that ability. And I'm not saying that, you know what I mean, you turn your working life into a curiosity shop.
You're striking me as a bit of a philosopher here now, Jim. I mean, seriously, you're quite reflective now. Are you saying that you're only getting the time to do that now, or were you always this way?
I'd always, in the last number of years, I suppose, probably from the crash on, I think there was something that suddenly brought things into perspective in reality when you saw people, and the chat we had earlier about the individuals I met along the way. I would have taken more time to reflect, and it's critical. That piece around reflection, I wouldn't have had a concern around as I came through. And indeed, working with the team and reflecting and thinking about how we were doing and challenging ourselves, etc., really important. But I think just that piece around the curiosities, just being able to spend a bit of time messing around with stuff, taking off the mittens that you might have had on, and being able to touch and see stuff is fascinating.
Jim, why did you step down?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, as I said at the time, many factors. You're
a young fella, by the way. I'm sitting opposite here, a young man in his 50s, but much fresher than that. I mean, you're in good fettle, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of things. I felt I was in good fettle. I was, family were in a good position. I've my wife and 3 wonderful daughters and a wonderful wife. All in good space, you know, working their way through college, finished college, etc. So all that in good shape, and really, I had done the retail job in the bank for a number of years and enjoyed it. Did it through COVID, which was extraordinary, and really felt, you know, is the opportunity now to step out and really just think about something else, something different. And also give a bit of space to the world for who's coming on.
Succession,
and I felt, there was a lot of good people there to carry on. So, and you know, initially it's a difficult discipline when you step away to actually not step back onto another treadmill.
Yeah.
But I must say,
the non-exec circuit or something like that, or
and sorry, I'm at pains always to say I'm not at all disparaging of any of that.
Of course, it's not. Yeah,
individuals. This is a personalised journey. Yeah. Okay, and that's not for me just now. And the other pieces are I've had the opportunity to get under the bonnet with a couple of the NGOs to understand how it operates. And we were talking earlier about the trickle down of wealth in the economy, in our economy. You know, the trickle down of wealth into the NGO sector where it is needed is challenging.
Right.
And you know, I'd love to see something that can unleash that for good, you know, in terms of supporting. But anyway, that's a journey.
Yeah, and on the succession piece, we won't get into it because it would just take too long. But to me, it's a huge topic in itself that I'm seeing it, Jim. Organizations that I'm interfacing with are just not ready for that, are not proactively focusing on succession the way they should. And I'm not just talking about family companies here. I'm even talking about large companies. But another conversation, another time. Jim, what's next for Jim?
Yeah, so I found the pieces that I wanted in relation to that NGO, that AI piece.
So it's more of that then.
More of that. This weekend I'm off to the UK for a residential AI and society weekend with a group of people, and I've done some study on it already, and I'm going to do some study with Oxford on over the next couple of months in relation to it. And I'm probably going to lean in a little bit more advisory on one or two of the NGOs that I'm working with, maybe just stepping a little bit beyond the mentoring piece to support them. And but balance.
Yeah.
Balance.
Yeah.
I've a couple of daughters who were enjoying the sunshine in Australia, as they were telling me this morning on the way across.
All right.
So I spend a bit of time with family, etc. But I'm enjoying it.
Well, Jim, let's leave it there. That's been a fantastic round the houses chat around banking and you and NGOs and sustainability and all sorts of great things. And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming in. Okay, take care, Jim. Take your business to the next level. Introducing the CARA 7+ Index, the ultimate organisation health assessment. This is built on solid research. The assessment delivers clear insights, data and benchmarks on what truly drives success. The CARA 7 steps to profit are common sense. But here's the reality. Common sense isn't always common practice. Leaders know what they should do, but their best intentions often get diluted before reaching the front line and eventually your customers. That's where the CARA 7+ Index comes in, because it cuts through the noise, identifies priorities, and gives you the proof and stimulus to act with confidence. This isn't just another survey. It's a game-changing tool, blending cutting-edge AI, robust research, and expert consulting, all to turn insights into action. So, no more guesswork, just clarity and results. Please visit 7plusindex.com to start your journey to better business health today. Thank you very much for listening, and please do hit the subscribe button or leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thank you.